So thank you everyone for being here, and I feel very lucky to be sharing my story with you today. I'm going to walk you through the journey of Anxy, but through the lens of what it's taken to develop that project. And I titled this presentation Going Beyond a Personal Passion Project because what started as a personal passion project kind of ballooned into something bigger, almost, without realizing it. And that's sort of what I'm going to share with you today. And my hope is that as you delve into your own projects, you start to take away certain things that you can use to nurture what you're going to do with them. So for those of you who don't know Anxy is a mental health magazine, and it started about 2-3 years ago as a Kickstarter project. Since we started, we've had 4 issues on anger, boundaries, workaholism, and masculinity. And the idea of the magazine is to create this point of view in which we tell these very personal stories through a very vulnerable lens and also through art and design. And till date, we've done about 5 Kickstarters. And our model is through Kickstarters, we create the kind of like the foundation, that capital foundation to create the issues. And from there, we create each magazine. And we've been really successful, raising over, in the collective of all the campaigns, over $100,000. And with the first campaign, we raised $50,000, which for us was a really big signal that this is something that people wanted and needed. To give you a context of how we work together, so Anxy is definitely a passion project, a love project of a lot of collaborators. My main collaborators are, editors I've met throughout, my years at the Bold Italic, at Medium, and I've collaborated with them to make this project happen. So here are the editors sort of like brainstorming our ideas for the magazine. Alongside of creating the magazine, I was running a design studio called Anagraph. So I would basically be dwelling between the design studio and the magazine and sort of making, both things together. And to give you a sense of, the back end of that, we're also, working with print producers to create the actual object, bringing it from design to production to, putting it in people's hands. And this is a part that sometimes gets forgotten, like how much labor goes into delivering things into people's hands and working, with USPS or FedEx or DHL or whatever, and, packaging everything. And sometimes it's like the invisible work that we don't get to see. And, since we've been publishing the magazine, Anxy has gathered, has become like its own brand, rooted in this idea of, humanizing how we feel through the lens of art. And what we've tried to do is create a brand that people feel sort of represented by and not ashamed of, sort of being who they are, and in a way, almost feeling proud of carrying around, this magazine or these objects that say that, I'm Anxy. And, a question that I get often asked is, why did I create Anxy? And why is it focused on art? And the first thing I want to do is share with you our manifesto video to kind of set the tone, and I'll walk you through, some of that thinking after.
Let's look at our inner worlds, the ones we often refuse to share, the secret hopes, the personal struggles, the fears that fool us into believing that the rest of the world is normal. We want to create a publication dedicated to eliminating the stigma around being sad, feeling stuck, or showing our vulnerabilities. A magazine focused on true understanding without judgment. Articles that cut through the clutter to offer real discussions about all the thoughts, feelings, and emotions buzzing in our heads. Let's share our stories, talk about those difficult moments, and explore how they affect our lives. Let's stop pretending we're flawless and have the courage to be our full selves. Anxy Magazine.
So, the idea of the magazine was to create, make this more evident. The fact that many of us are walking around, in the world carrying these stories with us and carrying these narratives about, our inner worlds, and we protect our inner worlds. Our inner worlds is only shared with maybe a few or maybe with no one. And we kind of create this persona that everything is okay. So we go around pretending to each other that everything is okay, while at the same time inside we might be carrying all these feelings of sadness or depression or feeling misunderstood. And I really wanted to create a project in which we could open this up, especially because most of us at some point in our lives or throughout our lives are going to experience difficult things. And the fact that we don't feel vulnerable or safe enough to talk about it with each other then creates, a more difficult situation in which we can't really be ourselves. And the truth is, like, a lot of us have experienced difficult things. This has been my experience as a survivor of sexual abuse as a child. And it's something that I've carried all my life. And in a way, it's something that has defined who I am. So, when something like that happens to someone where you don't have any control over, and it happens, in an environment where, we're supposed to be protected, what do you do with that? Especially at such an early age. And for me, it meant walking around in the world feeling broken and trying to make sense of that story, trying to make sense of my story and how it affected me. But when you're growing up, you don't understand what's going on, and you don't understand why something like that would happen. And my journey to getting to Anxy has been about that. I was, very lucky that I went to a very structured school where I kind of got, sort of distracted by all the academics of everything. And one of our teachers, we had a lot of American teachers because it was a bilingual school. He brought, he created a dark room in our school that introduced me to photography. And it was photography that really allowed me to start understanding that I had a voice and I had a way to see the world, and creating a conversation with myself about how I interpret things. And I later went to Parsons, and through Parsons I continued to explore this idea of photography. And when I think of the work we've done with Anxy, I see that influence of wanting to really connect with myself through connecting with other people. So I did a lot of, portraiture of, people at Parsons and friends, and just trying to kind of see if I could see who they were as a way of seeing myself. And it was sort of like an interesting exercise for me because I was studying graphic design all along, and yet I was spending most of my time taking pictures. And I can see the influence of the work that I did at Parsons in what I've done today. And I want to show you, for example, what my thesis project was for Parsons, called the self-concept. And I basically asked women to come into a photo room and bring an object or something that represented who they were as their identity. And it really, now, this was more than 10 years ago. When I look back, I see I've always been interested in this inquiry about who we are and how we navigate life, given all the circumstances that happen. And here are some pictures of, what that looked like. Women just presenting themselves as they are in the session, and me trying to connect, again, trying to see myself through them. So, I eventually graduated and I met my partner and I moved to the Bay Area. And, in the process of being at Parsons, it was my first experience actually working with a therapist and getting mental health care. And I'm starting to feel like, okay, I've explored some of these things, I've connected with myself, life's really taking a certain direction. I started working, at Salesforce and Medium, and kind of felt like I should have this figured out now. But this is the insight that actually made me feel like I needed to dig deeper, and that we needed to have a more collective conversation, which is that, what we don't really investigate in ourselves, we are doomed to repeat. We are doomed to sort of be in this pattern. And I realized that one of my patterns for me was a lot of distress in terms of emotional dysregulation, which is a very common symptom of trauma. And the thing that surprised me once I started learning more about tachyreducation is like a lot of us don't even have this vocabulary. I don't know if you all know the sympathetic and parasympathetic system, but essentially when you experience trauma, your body gets locked into a state of stress. So your tolerance for stress can be either very low or zero tolerance at all, and it takes you into a fight or flight response. And yet, when we look at the experience that we have and how we behave around trauma, we think something wrong with me. It's my personality, it's the way that I am. We over-identify with this idea of how you had to navigate surviving. And many times what we had to do was, we had to do that to survive, and it's not really who we are, it's really how we've navigated life. And if we start to see that my body is reacting in a way that it needed to, then you can start to open up a window in which you can reclaim your life. And to me, this is very important because, and I want to go back to this slide, like I really do deeply believe this, that if we want to reclaim our lives when these things happen, we really have to be unafraid to discover where our unmet needs are and try to meet them for ourselves. And this goes along with this notion of self-actualization, like how do we actually get to who we are? And another thing that we don't learn a lot about is this idea of attachment theory. And I don't know, maybe for those of you who are parents, attachment theories might be more familiar, but the way we bond with other people since childhood actually create a blueprint for what our relationships are in all aspects of our lives, any interpersonal relationship, including relationship at work. And yet, when we find ourselves in difficult situations and in difficult relationships, again, we blame ourselves, not really understanding that there's a blueprint that we're working with and a blueprint that needs to be repaired. So, and I'm showing you all of this because part of my mission is to educate people on the importance of psychoeducation and what can happen when we can connect with this idea of trying to figure out what our unmet needs are and trying to get to this point of individuation, which is where self-actualization actually happens, where you can feel you're fully yourself living an authentic life. So, sort of with that impetus, I did this Medium post that was the catalyst to launching the Anxy as a project. And now I'm gonna kind of walk you through, what the project looks like. And again, like, the idea for Anxy was to use art and design as a way to humanize mental health and as a way to make it accessible, emotionally engaging. When you look at the way mental health is spoken about as if it's an illness, it's pathologizing, it's medicalized, it's not really about experience. And that's what we wanted to focus on with the magazine. So to give you a sense of, what Anxy looks like, each issue is different. This is from the anger issue. And we focus on, beautiful personal stories done with great art direction and illustration, sort of using typography and design to really elevate the stories and allow to, connect with the vulnerability of everything's being shared. We have, interviews, we have photo essays, we work with, high-profile individuals who can help us tell the story. In this case, Margaret Atwood talking about, anger and how it connected to, her Handmaid's Tale series. And we try to connect with artists that are trying to share, what has happened with their lives and how they're, moving forward. This is the workaholism issue, and this issue was really important for me because one of the things that I realized in my journey is that work became my distraction, and working excessively, I wasn't realizing that in a way I was kind of running away from all of these narratives. And there is like a difference between working hard and working compulsively. And with this issue, we wanted to explore where is that line? How do we decide whether we're working hard or we're working compulsively? And we have stories like the stories about Vegas where you cannot expect it to be on 24/7. And how do you navigate that when your environment is actually encouraging you to work, in this manner? This is one of my favorite stories in this issue. It's called High Pressure, and it's about the students who, witnessed a classmate's died of suicide and how they internalized that and how they navigated that. And in a way, they talk about the pressures that they feel in high school around performing. And, this is for us a way to explore how we create a culture of workaholism, even at the level of high school. This is the video we did for the boundaries issue that I want to share with you, just so you get a feel for not only what we're doing in terms of print, but also how we tell the story of each series. So this is for the boundaries issue.
What lines do we draw? And what space do we create? Who pushes our limits, and why? And when do we push back? Let's talk about boundaries, how they shift from person to person, place to place, and moment to moment. How they can be imposed from the outside or come from within. Let's talk about the things behind our boundaries, our inner worlds, our personal stories, the feelings that define who we are and where we draw the line. This is the boundaries issue. Anxy magazine.
So you can see that with each issue, we pick a theme that becomes sort of like a conceptual framework for the magazine. And in this case, this idea of blurred lines and colors really represented what we wanted to show with boundaries. And it's a theme that carries throughout each issue. And again, you can see the vocabulary of personal essays, use of illustration, and really focusing on elevating design in every page. The final issue was the masculinity issue, and this is one of the issues that was really, trying to create conversation of what we saw emerging as a collective of like, what is the role of masculinity, how we define masculinity. And I'm gonna play that video for you as well.
Let's talk about masculinity. Its many shapes and shades, what we fear and what we celebrate. Let's explore its definitions, how much masculinity we inherit or create through labels, culture, and expectations. Let's start a new conversation about masculinity, one that includes both strength and vulnerability, power and accountability, courage and honesty. This is the masculinity issue. Anxy magazine.
So I'm going to skip through some of the spreads because I want to get to the second part of what I want to talk about. But you get a sense of what we're trying to do with each issue and how we delve into each theme. We got to interview Terry Crews for a masculinity issue, which was amazing. But the interesting thing about Anxy was that it actually became a project that gathered way more attention than I expected. It's probably one of the most high-profile projects I've worked on in my career. We ended up packaging it as a box set as well. But what I want to talk about now, can I have 5 minutes? Yeah, thanks. What I want to talk about now is like what happens when a project starts to unfold in this way. So again, we were running the magazine as part of the studio, and the magazine in itself was also gaining, sort of like global recognition. And it kind of tends to pull you in, and there was this tension between what started as something small becoming big, and what do you do with that? And just to give you an idea, like Anxy in 2 years became, shortlisted with some of your favorite indie magazines around the world. We were able to get a lot of, press recognition for this understanding of using design as a way to see mental health differently. We were selling the magazine all over the world on some of the biggest stockists like Do You Read Me in Berlin and Athenaeum in Amsterdam and places that I've actually never been to. And one of the things I was most proud of is how we were able to, with the limited resources we had, be in the same line as, at SPD, we actually won awards together with New York Times Magazine and California Sunday, being recognized by San Francisco Suicide as, an organization destigmatizing mental health and being awarded together with the Born This Way Foundation, which is Lady Gaga's foundation. So seeing that our work was actually having impact. And this is one of the quotes that moves me the most when I think about the impact that we've created. I know that it would have been easier to deal with my anxiety and depression if I had the opportunity to speak about it to an open community that didn't label me as weak or crazy, what you and your team are doing is absolutely necessary, and I truly believe that it can save lives. So when you're kind of find yourself in this place of, really seeing design transform a conversation, it feels really meaningful. And when I think about the contribution that we made, was around this idea of meaning making, helping people tell their stories and make meaning of their lives. And doing in such a way where you can have mindfulness that help you understand and live in the present, but you also need this idea of understanding your self-concept with clarity so you can know who you are and actually, again, reclaim your life. And for me, this is the formula of well-being. And what we've done is, shift the conversation from problem solving and optimization and sort of like this notion of self-help to one of experience. What does it mean to have lived these things, and how do you navigate them? And so, in the midst of this, there was an opportunity to turn Anxy into this multi-channel mental wellness brand. And, that was, a direction in which we could have gone to. But something that happened, and this is the personal piece for me in the journey of making the magazine, is that I found myself in a medical incident. And this screen is red because one day I was at a restaurant and I felt this thing in my body, and I went to the restroom, and I think I had a miscarriage, and I didn't even realize. And it gave me a pause. A big pause that had to do with, me and what I was doing and how it was coming through the magazine. And, one of the things that I learned after investigating about this incident is, I discovered I had fibroids. And the fibroids are these sort of like non-cancerous cysts that grow in your body. They're actually related to trauma. And they're related to the way trauma impacts the body. And sometimes we don't think about that because we think it's kind of in our heads, but it's also in our bodies. And it created a situation for me where I actually had to, go to the hospital, get them removed, be under for like 5 hours. I've never even been hospitalized before. So this was, a really invasive experience for me, and one that also, connected my whole story from the very beginning of how trauma has impacted my life. And it's sort of, interesting because you also realize how powerful the body is. And, the same day I was able to walk out of the hospital. You can make fun of it as well and keep it light, But, it got me thinking about this process of, when we have an idea and then we set an ambition and, we try to understand the limitations. We try to, define project needs and evaluate resources and see how we can execute. We come up with an action plan, and we go through this process of reevaluating and trying to get to this, point of, creating sustainability, which is what I was trying to do with Anxy. And then you think about what are your personal needs, and how do they change, and how do they influence what you're trying to do with your personal project. And I had to really take a deep step back, which was really difficult because I could see, the wonderful things we were doing with the project. But something happened with that surgery, which has made me feel like how trauma-focused I had been in my life and how I kind of wanted to, transition from that. And it also made me realize that I had learned so many things from my trauma experience and turned them into what we call adapted skills, something that for limiting now feels like a source of creation. And I really wanted to own my story in a different way. And I really love this quote by Michelle Obama about, your story is something to own. And I felt that through my journey with Anxy, I was changing my story. And that's really, something that kind of pushed us to kind of conclude the project and realize that, as our personal truth changes, our story evolves. And sometimes the outcome of that is, what you thought you needed from a project is not what you need anymore. And I feel really grateful for everything we've done. I realized that Anxy became for me what I wish I had. People I wanted to experience, protection that I felt that I needed, connecting with other people that felt the same way as I did. But I also understood that, it had its time. So I want to leave you with two quotes. One is a quote, one is a question. The truly heroic to put the effort to live through pain and to be spontaneously transformed by it. I hope you give yourselves the opportunity to do that. And this question is, do you allow yourself to be vulnerable enough to become self-aware, what gives you a sense of meaning and purpose in your creative work? And when the time comes, to also let that work go. Thank you so much.